everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, possibly good evening. I'm John Schwabish. I'm a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. Thanks so much for joining us for this APPAM webinar with Dan Gorenstein, founder and executive editor at Tradeoffs. We're excited to see you all. Just a reminder that the APPAM Fall Conference is coming up this November in Seattle, and I know the reviewers and the chairs are working hard to review the I don't know, Michelle could tell us whether it's a record number of submissions, but I know it's a lot of submissions, so people are making their way through it. I also just quickly let you know that we do have some more webinars coming up over the next few months in the lead up to the fall conference. I will be talking about data and data visualization at our next one on Tuesday, June 24th, so about a month from now. That one will be at 2 Eastern time. But for today, we get it right over to Dan Gorenstein, who is going to teach us all about finding the stories in our research. I know a challenge that many of us have. Dan is the founder and executive editor of Tradeoffs, which is setting the vision for organizations, journalism, and strategy. Before Tradeoffs, Dan was a senior healthcare reporter at Marketplace and spent 11 years at New Hampshire Public Radio. He got his start at the Chicago Reporter. Is that still around, Dan?
Uh,
Chicago Reporter?
I don't know. It might not be.
um, and Dan has a great voice. He has a great face for podcasts, but also an actually great voice for podcasting. He's won numerous national awards, including the Society of Professional Journalists Sigma Delta Chi Investigative Reporting Award. So excited to hear this talk, Dan. And as we go, Dan has already said, like, feel free to ask questions, drop them in the chat window, and Leslie and I will make sure that he sees those. The more active, the more action, the better. So Dan, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, John. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, depending on your time zone. Super psyched to be here. I would ask for as many of you who feel comfortable, who are able to go put your face on the screen and make this as interactive as possible. Thanks, Karan. Appreciate that. Karen, I'm not sure, but go ahead.
Oh, you were right the first time. It's Karan.
Karan, thanks, Karan. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I'd love to see as many people as possible, make this as interactive as possible. Ashley, nice to see you too. I'm really excited to be here. Been given this training for a while, and I think let me tell you a little bit about me, and that'll explain a little bit about why I'm so excited to be. Samina, nice to see you too. Divi, thank you guys for all showing up. So Tradeoffs is we're an organization. We've been around for about 6 years. We produce weekly podcasts. We're a national nonprofit news organization founded in Philly, which is where I am. And we have had a podcast out now for about 5.5, 6 years. And we have about 45 to 50,000 people a week listen. It puts us in the top 1% of most listened to podcasts in the country, which is pretty exciting because it's health policy. And we, through our reporting, have figured out a way to center research, data, and human storytelling in a way that is accessible and engaging to lots of people. More than 66 colleges and universities around the country have used our content in their classrooms. And our podcast comes out on Thursdays. It's called Tradeoffs. You can get it wherever you get podcasts. And it's sure, of course, we want as many of you to listen as possible, but more than that, Tradeoffs is an example of how research gets translated. If you want to kind of hear that in action, Tradeoffs is actually a good place to do it. We really believe in the value and the power of the work that you all do. It's actually pretty essential. And in some ways, part of why it's always such an honor to talk to academics, in my mind, is because you all are the ones who are asking cutting edge questions. And thanks to you, we know something on Thursday that we didn't know on Wednesday. And in that way, it's almost like making magic, right? Like you guys are asking these very important questions, rigorously evaluating evidence and data, and putting new information out. You build our knowledge. How important is that knowledge, though, if people don't really understand or know about it? And I suspect that's why you all are on this call today, because you all are here because you're excited and eager to figure out how more people can understand the work that you do. And sign me up. That's what I believe in. That's what I really want to do. And I'm hoping that today you can learn a few things about how to better translate your own work so more people can understand it, so more people can have the benefit of the knowledge that you're helping create. So with that said, before I go into anything more, I'd really love 2 or 3 people to volunteer to just explain like why you're here and what you're hoping to get out of this. Because one final thing I'll say is that as I've done this training over the years, I've learned that a lot of people, a lot of researchers, a lot of you all have similar questions, similar fears, similar challenges. And not only do you have an opportunity to learn from me, but perhaps you have an opportunity to learn from each other. And the more people talk about the challenges and questions that they have, the more you all can look to each other going forward after today to look to each other for guidance. You also can look to me, but I want to underscore that there's a lot of expertise on this call. It's not just with the person talking. So with that said, can I have one volunteer? Please just introduce yourself, your name, where you work, and something that you're really excited about getting out of this, or a challenge or question that you have.
I don't want to
Just
volunteer anyone, Dan, but I'll just read a couple of comments in the chat window that I think are sort of right up there. So,
Yep.
Karan put in the chat window, challenges I'm finding right now, especially anything related to vulnerable populations, being either not recorded or no longer exists. So this is sort of the takedown of the federal data. And then Sarah put a question in. Often research needs to be explained among multiple contextual factors. How do we best share the information without too much time or slash overwhelming of the contextual information? So just a couple. There's a few more, but that gets us started.
Right, great. Okay. Overwhelming, too much info. Yeah, that's a really good one. All right. And vulnerable, Karan, I want to sort of better understand the vulnerable population point. We'll move into that as we go through. So what we're going to talk about over the next 48 minutes here is really trying to help you all, give you some tips to, I think the most important thing we're going to do this afternoon today is really discuss how you can look at your own work and begin to dissect it and translate it for yourself so you can create something that is more accessible to a larger audience. That's a big part of what we're going to do. I will also run through some tips about how you engage and talk with the press. And if we have time, and I have a volunteer, we might be able to do a mock interview if there is time for that. And please, along the way, ask questions, stop me. I want this to be as interactive and as meaningful for you all as possible. Okay. So this slide, I think, is important and does a really nice job of helping make clear what the challenge is. I think all of you know this. I don't think we need to hit too hard on this, but I will share one quick anecdote. I was talking with my cousin's wife and her parents. Her name is Kai. Kai's parents were graduates of UCSF, and or at least her dad was, who's now a physician. And they were back and they were there to do a fundraiser. And Kai's parents understood that there was lots of cool, interesting things going on, but they didn't really follow much of it. And Kai's parents made the point, like, we want to give money, and we would give money, we would give philanthropically if we better understood what was actually being discussed and talked about. And the point is that there are opportunities here, and the more clear you can be about what you're doing, what you have found, and what questions you want to ask next, there are opportunities on the table for you all to better further realize your academic and research goals. Okay. So finding the story in your study. Here's the tips. Here's what I think is the most important thing. So the first is asking, I'm gonna break down what each of these three questions means. What problem is your research trying to solve? A lot of times what happens for me, a non-academic, is I get a paper and it's really lacking a lot of context. The paper really sort of starts with the findings, and I don't know, the paper sort of presupposes that I know and understand everything. So what this first question asks you to do is to stop and pause. Your question is actually part of a larger series of questions, right? That is trying to better understand. That's part of a work. If somebody has a findings on diabetes, like what is the problem in the United States around diabetes? And so answering this question, what problem is your research trying to solve? The problem may be that diabetes has grown X% over the last decade, and we're trying to figure out how to slow that down. And because of this growth in diabetes, U.S. Medicare spending has gone up 27%, and there's been an increase in the number of procedure amputations. Right? That's this like larger context. So we can begin, we the audience, the general audience can begin to understand and fit your research, your finding into this larger problem. And let me just pause there. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions or confusion there? Anybody want to jump in? I also want to say, the more feedback I can get from, I'm going to take off this coat. The more feedback I can get from you guys, the more I'm going to warm up. It's very hard to do this thing over Zoom. So would love, is this making sense? And get some thumbs up.
A question to ask on that. It's just like, how much into the historical context is helpful to go? Because staying context, you know, it's just, it could be as expansive as you give it room.
Totally. Too much context is too much. I think this is going to be true for all three of these questions. That's a great question. Thank you for it. You want to give enough without overwhelming. And how do you know what that is, right? Of course, one of the things that I will encourage you all to do is, after you've asked yourself these three questions and have come up with answers for these three questions, then try it out on somebody, but not a colleague who has the same area of expertise as you, a colleague who does not have this expertise, or a neighbor, or a family member, a friend, someone you respect, someone who is smart, someone who is a proxy for a reporter or a lawmaker that could really take in this idea. And if you end up giving too much context, you know, and you're not sure, did I give too much context or not, after you've done your run through of answering these questions, let them tell you if that's too much context. But I think when you set out to just write it, first off, it's just trying to make sure you say, okay, like with the diabetes has grown at X%. In and of itself is probably not enough. It's also saying, like, and what's the so what about the diabetes? At Tradeoffs, one of the things we think about all the time is the intersection of policy, money, and people. And so when you think about defining the problem, what is the financial impact of the problem and what is the medical health societal impact of this problem. And covering those two bases will take you a long way towards giving enough context. Any other questions on this before we move to the second question? Okay, I'll move on. So this next question, what do we know now that we didn't know before? Again, this is another sort of context moment, right? Your paper has a finding. That finding is built on usually lots and lots of other findings. How does your finding advance the conversation? What contribution does it make to this larger discussion that people are having around the growth of diabetes in the United States, for example? Pause there. Does that question make sense to folks? Great, thank you. And then the third question, which can trip people up sometimes, is so what? Why does this matter? Why is your finding important? And how can it help us better understand this problem? Because this is important. Not all papers that you all produce are created equal. Some papers are smaller, right? They're just not as important. They don't really move the needle. For those papers, if there's some cause to translate them, to run them through the filter of these three questions, fine. But for the papers that you all do that you think have some real public appeal to a particular group of folks outside of academia, running them through this filter of three questions is going to really help people get this and understand this. And I think if we understand as a result of, and obviously I'm just making this up, if somebody has a new way, their research is around the testing of diabetes, and it's a farther upstream test. The so what there is that we've got this problem, we've got this growing problem, more and more cases of diabetes, more spending, more suffering, more medical procedures, and getting this test into the hands of providers is going to mean that we're going to make it much more likely that we can see fewer cases. We can spend less money. And I think sometimes too often research is like published in a vacuum. It's as if all that is discussed in the research is just the findings in and of itself. And that, I know that's how you all were trained, and that's fine, and that's appropriate for a journal. But when you're trying to translate it, what you're really trying to do is make this a story, right? And so we've got the three questions, and every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in some sense, that's what each of these three questions is, right? The beginning is the context of the problem. The middle is what do we now know thanks to your research? And the third is who gives a fuck? Why does this matter? So that's our conclusion. And then at the tail end, it's like, and what else do we need to know now? Where are we going next? And so if you can hit those three, your beginning, your middle, and your end, and you've told a story about your research and how your research fits into this larger arc of our understanding, this history of knowledge around your research, then all of a sudden you've created a story that most people can follow. And if the problem is big enough, then what you're doing with that first contextual question is you're hooking people. You're getting them excited because they're like, damn, that's a problem. This is scary shit. What are we going to fucking do? And you're like, well, I'm glad you asked. my research helps answer that question. This is what we potentially can do. And then you have the so what, and that blends in a little bit with the so what. But so I'm going to pause, stop, questions, like would love feedback, concerns, whatever.
Thank you for breaking that down. I think that that is really important. And, working at a university, like sometimes that's just not that's just not what, like you said, we're not really trained to do. But one of the things that made me think of, which I think is helpful for me right now, because I'm getting ready to disseminate some stuff from a grant from a project, is like sometimes you're so deep in it, right? You think about your study. Well, I have this big project, but really I have 3 research questions and they all sort of like fit together, right? So like I needed to answer the first one to answer the second one to answer the third. But as I'm sitting here, I'm also thinking that, I mean, the each research question also is its own story, right? Like there's a reason that that you do the first one like that. And so I'm just kind of thinking through, like in a bigger project, maybe you're doing this for each and maybe also as a whole. Is that, I mean, like if you're thinking about disseminating that?
Yeah, I think this is a good question, and this gets to Sarah's question at the top about like, too much, what is too much information? And this is a point that I think is really important. I think many of you have been trained to be ready to answer anything and everything, to get deep into the weeds. That is, in fact, the job. This is so what I'm about to say is the anti-job in a way, because what I think you can do, particularly when you're translating, like it's different if it's like for a committee of other academics, or it's a paper that you're presenting at a conference and people want to know get into the methodology. But when you're talking to people who don't give a shit about your methodology, write this down, people. You've heard it before. Less is more. So the challenge is in filtering your own work, giving people the bare minimum, knowing and respecting, and this gets kind of like psychological, respecting them enough that they will ask more questions if they need more information. You can always say, because everybody on this call is an expert in your topic. You all could go 2 hours into your topic. So it's not a question of whether or not you know all the things, but if you give the skeleton and people need more, let them ask. And you can even say to them, I can say more if you want it, if you need more context, if you need more information, I'm happy to get into the weeds, but I'm going to start, like right when you start your conversation, you can say, I can get as deep as you all want to go, but I'm going to start at the most simple slice of this so everyone can get their arms around it. And at any point, if you need additional information, I am here and I'm available. You can reassure them that you've got all the answers, but that you are respecting them and their starting point enough to say, I'm going to start easy so everybody in the room can get their arms around this. Does that make sense, Ashley?
Yeah, yes, it does. Thank you.
And Sarah, do you feel like that's speaking to your question as well? Sarah might not be here. We'll keep going. All right, and then maybe this is the same Sarah. Successfully answering these questions often depends on audience. Is there a universal strategy to hit a large, diverse audience so that it captures multiple layers effectively? And I think that's what I've just tried to explain, Sarah, is that giving people the barest bones, really kind of stripping it down to its most essential parts, that's where you are going to find that universality. I had I interviewed a professor one time, an Ivy League professor, who said to me that they only teach to the front of the class. They're not really concerned about the back of the class. And if you can keep up, great. And if you can't, see you later, whatever. I'm just taught, the professor said, am only teaching to the ones who can keep up with me. I think that attitude exists among lots of researchers and academics. If you want to do translation, if you actually care about impact and dissemination, what we call at Tradeoffs, reach, engagement, and impact, you are going to think about the back. You're going to think about the people who understand this least, and you're going to frame your talk, your translation of your work for that last row, the people who are least interested. How are you going to get them? Because usually if you get them, you're going to get everybody else in the front too. And if the people in the front want more, well, then afterwards you go out and have coffee with them and you guys dive deep and go down all the rabbit holes. That's awesome. So that's how I think, Sarah, to your question, hopefully that gives you an answer. And if you're on the call, give us a thumbs up or something if you have a follow-up
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate that. A follow-up maybe is, when I'm thinking about the context I think that you're talking about is like some of these academic conferences, right? Like we go to all these academic conferences to talk about some of the great research that we're doing, and there's this demand to have the storytelling put into a particular structure. And I've really struggled with this starting to go to more and more academic conferences because they are so boring.
So boring.
So boring, not useful.
Can you bring your phone?
Like, what the heck? Why are we even here? And so I'm trying to step out of that, and I don't quite know where the boundaries are, but the storytelling piece just seems like it's completely missing from a lot of these conferences. And I would love to find new ways to be more like you and how amazing you are at storytelling and figuring out, how to leverage all of these tools to greater effect.
Well, I mean, thanks for that. I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm curious, do you feel like for you, not that this is an end of one call, but do you feel like for you, these three questions you would find these three questions useful as you try to do this self-translation?
Oh, absolutely. And this also is a very different ask in presenting work than is structured in all academic conferences. And so giving at least myself the leverage or the leeway to not worry about, step outside of the whatever boundaries or whatever is put upon us in these kinds of spaces, and instead going towards the more human storytelling side, I think is really where it's at.
Totally. And I'll just say, I go to ASH Econ every year, which is the American Society of Health Economists annual conference. And, it's just like wall-to-wall paper presentations. And it's pretty tough. And every now and then, you get somebody who decides they're going to break the mold and they're just going to tell the story. They're going to do a beginning, middle, and end. And it's just like, granted, I'm not an economist, so I'm a different audience member, but every time I'm like, wow, that's cool. That's pretty awesome. Like, I think one of the things, this tip may be total bullshit for you guys, but like, you are professors, you are academics. People assume you're smart and knowledgeable. You don't need to then like kind of flex on people and start talking about methodology and be all like, let me drop the big words so you all know how smart I fucking am. Like, you did the research. You are smart. We know this. So you want to really prove how smart you are, translate it so everybody in the room can understand and get them excited. That's the challenge. You want to really prove how smart and creative you are? Do that. Because most of your colleagues don't. That's what's going to make you stand out. Okay. More comment. Like, really, guys, the more engagement we have, the more you're going to get out of me. Any other questions, comments, whatever here?
Dan, I do have one question for you, and maybe you're going to get to this a little bit later in your presentation. So I may be jumping the gun. I apologize. I used to be a consultant before I got back into academia. I'm now in my second round of grad school, getting my doctorate after being a consultant for about 20 years to local governments and nonprofits. And I happened to work in a field where the type of research that I was being asked to do for these clients was very interesting for a variety of reasons to the general public as well as to the local media. And I had two problems. Because I never really had the kind of translation problem that we're talking about here. I can do that. And my reports typically did that. But what I was often facing were two things. One is the clients often didn't like the results that I got. And they would straight up ask me to change the data so that when the media got a hold of the report, it was much more favorable to the client than it otherwise would have been.
Right.
And then the second problem I ran into was the local media itself, which would often twist the data or use the data that were in my report in ways that it was never intended to be used or
Right.
interpreted as.
Right. It was
And-
distorted. The findings were distorted.
Exactly. I mean, and if you read the reports themselves, they never said what the media reports claimed that they said. But of course, the general public is just going to read, for the most part, you know, you might get a couple people who would actually go and read the original source material, but for the most part, people just read the article in the local newspaper or on the local news website. And that was that. And so they took the interpretation of the local reporter as the gospel on this particular topic. And it was incredibly frustrating for me because I had gone through all of this work to do good quality social science research just to have it, you know, twisted in this way. And sometimes the clients would get angry at me about it when,
Right.
you know, I'm like, look, you read the report, you know exactly what it said. I can't make the reporters say what you want them to say. That's what you have PIOs for. So, you know, those two issues I found incredibly frustrating, which honestly is part of the reason I got back into academia. I just got tired of it, of dealing with that. And so being someone that's, you know, kind of, you know, media or media adjacent, perhaps, can you speak to those two issues?
Sure. And also who I'm trying to, I don't know what's up with my Zoom settings. I can't find, who are you? What's your name?
Janet.
Janet?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me see. I'm just trying to find you so I can see you. I don't know what is up. Okay. So I still can't find you, Janet, but, so I mean, you guys are the magicians, not me. So I don't have a magic solution to this. This is real hard stuff. What I say, this always comes up. Some version of this comes up in every training. And the reality is, if you want to be in the communications business with your research, the cost of doing business is that some amount of what you do will be distorted. It will be gotten wrong. And communication in general is hard, whether we're talking about communication between you and your kid, you and your spouse, your partner, or let alone health policy research. Like so much is like, hey, can you do the dishes? A lot can be lost in translation in that simple interaction. So when we're talking about really complicated health policy things that very few people understand, the likelihood that things are going to be distorted, gotten wrong, taken out of context is exceedingly high. Later in this talk, and I should probably move into it, I'll try to give some tips. I think the best thing that you all can do is try to take as many steps as possible before the publication to try to ensure that the reporter themselves understands what your research says and what it does not say. So that's where I think there's some amount of, that's the best place where there can be some control. But if you, and I'm not saying this is true for you, but if anyone on this call does not want to ever be misquoted or ever have their work be gotten wrong in the press, jump off this call right now. Like the cost of doing business, it will happen. That's the downside. The upside, the reason I say stay on the call is because by talking to press, by talking to the larger public, that's how more people are going to understand. And what I've learned in my career as a journalist for over 20 years now is that more often than not, more people do understand than don't. And I'll take that trade. But I understand there's going to be somebody, we always get a note from somebody who's like, what was that story about? You completely missed the mark. And you're just like, you know, you go to a museum, you see a painting hanging up, you look at the color. I think it's orange, you think it's yellow. My son and I still don't agree about the red light, yellow light, green light. He still thinks it's orange. Like, it's not orange, buddy. So, you know, that's going to happen. All right. Is that helpful?
I think so. I mean, you know, I understand it to a degree. You know, we don't have control over what other people do with our research once, you know, it's out in the universe. I understand that. But, you know, yeah, I'm just kind of looking for specific strategies. And I've talked to other people over the years. I mean, I did that consulting work for 20 years before I finally just got fed up with it.
Right.
So you know, I'd been through lots of rounds of it. It's not like I did it for 2 years and jumped back out of it again. But I just, you know, I can't seem to find, you know, really effective strategies to try to circumvent or short circuit some of that misunderstanding. Or again, as in my case, I actually had, you know, direct attempts to get me to change data to make the client look better. And or, you know, media asking me, well, why, you know, this, if this doesn't mean this, why can't you just write this instead? You know, essentially asking me to change things. And so that's the part I don't understand, because that's just straight up, you know, unethical for the client to even ask someone to do that, a researcher to do that. And it just, you know, mind boggling to me that people think that that's okay. But I never found, after talking to other consultants in the field, other academics who were in the same area, you know, no one has really seemed to find some really effective techniques for trying to short circuit that. And that's what I'm really looking for after a couple of decades of trying to figure this out.
Yes. Well, we're about to get into this part where of specific strategies to minimize misunderstandings that I can help you with. I don't, when you have a client who wants, when you have a client who wants you to kind of like cook the books, change the thing after the fact, I don't really have many strategies to really help you, though I would say, and it's similar to how you build trust with the reporters, part of this, one thing I guess I would do if I were in your shoes and you were still doing this kind of contractual work, is upfront talk with the people about what their expectations are, and make sure that before you sign and agree to do this work, you understand what their expectations are, and they understand your expectations of them, and that you both agree on it. And, you know, if you were to do this in the future, saying something like, look, I've had clients, believe it or not, who after I've done the report have asked me to change the findings because they don't like the findings. I have found that to be unethical and completely inappropriate. I'm not comfortable doing that. And I want to do this kind of work. I'm excited about this contract, but I draw the line there, and I just need to make sure, I need to know what kind of client you are. Like, you know, I'm not putting it in the nicest, most political terms, but it is in having some, and this is actually very similar with the reporter, it's in having an upfront pre-conversation, whether it's a reporter or a potential client, about what people's expectations are, what's going to happen, I think goes a long way towards the difference between a tension-filled relationship or a fruitful, productive relationship. And so let me go. So this building trust and work with reporters, I'm gonna get into this a little bit more. And what we were just talking about is the being honest part. Something I'll be very quick about these first 2 points. Reporters usually know very little. They're not experts. You are the experts. They're usually parachuting in. When I worked at Marketplace, it was not uncommon for me to get a story assignment at 11 o'clock, and I was expected to turn something around by 3:30. That's not a lot of time when you know nothing. So reporters are kind of desperate to look particularly to the academics, because you all are the ones who are usually the most neutral. You see the lay of the land, you know the pros, you know the cons, you can lay that out, you can talk about the various players. Most other folks the reporters talk to have a vested interest in the reporters. While they might not be experts on the topic, they're not idiots. They know and understand that people are trying to sway them one way or the other. You all play this incredible role. So when a reporter comes to you asking for an interview, knowing that they know very little usually, and that you could be a really important sort of sobering voice, honest voice in a conversation in the story that they produce is really important. Being responsive, 11:30 to or 11 o'clock to 3:30. I can't tell you how many times we've reached out to an academic who's like, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll get back to you next week." You know, like if you're serious about wanting to have your work out in the public arena, even if you're being invited to be interviewed about somebody's work that's not, and it's not yours, being thoughtful and considerate, being treated the way you'd want to be treated is really important. Send a note. Let them know what your schedule is. Being honest. This is this like pre-conversation. Like, what do you, a lot of times researchers have said to me, I'm not sure if I'm the right person. I'm not sure if I should, if the reporter should interview me or interview someone else. There is such a great opportunity here for you all to, when you get a question or you're concerned or you're worried, whatever there is, reaching out to the reporter and saying, hey, can we have a conversation on background? Let me actually, let's talk about background off the record, on the record real quick. This is very important. A lot of people, there's no rule. Every reporter's got a different definition of what on the record, off the record, and on background means. When a reporter reaches out to you, this is an opportunity to set ground rules between you and that reporter. And this is an opportunity, I think a lot of times researchers have said to me that they kind of feel like they don't have any power in the situation. They're at the mercy of whatever the reporter does. But it is in this before the interview happens, when there's an opportunity for the two sides to come together and begin to have an honest conversation between each other. What are the expectations? It is perfectly, some reporters won't like this and you need to be prepared, but it is okay to say, can you give me a sense of the questions that you want to ask? Are there what other people are you talking to? Can you give me a sense of the angle? How much do you know about this topic? These are all wonderful questions that you can ask in an effort to sort of assess and understand who you are entering into this contract with. Where are they, what's their starting point? And I think that is a chance for you all to begin to understand what it might take to minimize any misunderstanding between you and the reporter. Another thing that you can do after the interview has happened is you can say things like, hey, before you go to print, can you fact check with me? Or even before that, at the end of the interview, before you get off the call or whatever, saying, hey, does all of that make sense? I know this can be pretty weedy. I just want to make sure you feel good about what we've discussed. One of the things to remember, going back to context, it's not just the reporter's context, it's your context. A lot of you are teachers. A lot of you have spent your careers trying to educate people. When you talk to reporters, when you talk to policymakers, you have another opportunity to teach. Again, it's not about you being the smartest person in the room. It's about you figuring out a creative way to make sure the person that is in front of you, meeting that person where they're at so they can understand. And you doing your best diagnostic on understanding, like, hey, does this reporter really seem to be knowledgeable, or are they completely wet behind the ears on this topic and I need to go super slow and watch my jargon? in this pre-interview moment, there's this chance for you to do this assessment and to actually, and not make assumptions, ask people and not being afraid to ask people. I want to pause there. I know we just have 11 minutes. I'm starting to speak really fast because I'm just trying to cram lots of stuff in, but that's probably not very helpful. So I'm going to slow down. I'm going to pause. Questions, thoughts about this relationship building? Okay. Then let's go to interview tips. This is a big deal for some folks, where if you're going to give an interview, you want to make sure you're quoted, that you actually sort of make the final piece. And a lot of times academics do not make the final piece. And one of the reasons why is because the quotes aren't that strong or are not that clear. And so how can you better prepare yourself when you are interviewed so that you're increasing the odds of being quoted? One of the things is, and I was touching on this in the previous slide, is you can ask for other information that will help you be prepared. One thing I really want to stress here is you all are entitled to try to set yourselves up to give the best interview you can. What is that? What is it that you need? Some people really like the questions in advance. Some people really like to know the angle of the story. Some people like to know the format, whatever it is. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over the like on background, on the record, off the record. When you talk with the reporter, make sure you get them to define their terms. One thing that can be really sort of dangerous, I'm not trying to scare people, but sometimes people will say, oh, that's off the record. There are journalists who will not agree that to go off the record is an agreement between, it's not like some magic pixie dust that the source can just sort of call out and then the reporter sort of honors the pixie dust. It has to be an actual agreement. Other reporters look at this very differently. If I was interviewing Ashley and Ashley said, oh, but that's off the record, I'd say, okay, that's fine. But another reporter might say, no, it's not. It's not off the record. You just said it. We didn't have any agreement about this. You can't take it back. So knowing beforehand what, what is it you need to make yourself comfortable? Well, you want to have an off the record conversation with somebody, with the reporter, so you can really understand what they're talking about. That's something that you can do. The other thing that you can do, and this goes back to the earlier slide about preparing the key points and zingers, is if it's about your own research, walking yourself through those 3 questions, and that through those 3 questions, doing that storytelling, the before, the middle, and the after, and trying to like carve up a couple of like good, succinct quotes that capture this is really great. And you can, if you can use analogies, that's great. Colorful language, a flair for the dramatic. If you're a funny person, be funny. If you're really good with analogies, try an analogy. You don't have to do all of the things, but what's a technique that when you're like hanging out with your friends or your family, who are you? What's the like kind of most winning, charming, persuasive part of you, and bringing that part to the interview. During the interview, keeping your answers as simple and succinct as possible, something that's very hard for researchers to do, or anybody when you're an expert. I've had a hard time during this call. Pause. pause. Make the point and stop. Let the person digest, reflect, think. They'll have another question. And if they don't, and you feel like you need to fill it, then fill it, but pause. Continually trying to monitor as you talk, providing this additional context. It's very easy for us to slip into jargon, all these assumptions because of how much knowledge we have. It's hard to remember that sometimes you're talking to somebody who has almost no context. So how keeping that in your mind is important. After, and this goes a long way towards trying to minimize misunderstandings, and with the press at least, is asking for a fact check. And one carrot that you can sort of dangle out to the reporter is a way to kind of get them to do a fact check, which is extra work for them, and sometimes the reporters don't want to do that, is to let them know that you are more than happy to share the work when it's going to be published. And lots of reporters, just like you all, are interested in impact. And you all are connected to a lot of powerful, thoughtful thought leaders in your area of expertise. And if you're willing to share this reporter's story with your network, that's a really powerful thing to a lot of other, to most reporters. And just to say, hey, I'm really excited about this story. This seems like it could be a great story. It can be pretty tricky and wonky. Would you be open to doing a fact check with me before you publish? And if you are, if you are, then I'd be more than happy to sort of share this. That's one way to do it. There are lots of different ways to do it. Okay, we have 5 minutes. We don't have time to do an interview practice, so we're not going to do that. But I want to talk with you guys over these last 5 minutes about what you are taking from today. Thoughts, reactions, questions?
There's one question from Ashley in the chat, Dan, about on background versus on the record or off the record. The kind of the difference between the two.
Yeah, each reporter treats that differently. Some reporters will, on background, can mean that you're telling me, you're giving me information. I'm going to use that information. I'm going to publish that information. I'm just not going to attribute it to you. I think that's a common way that is used. However, on background can also mean some version of off the record. I'm just taking this information and I'm not going to use it publicly. But maybe I'll use the information you give me with another source. But again, on background tends to signal some amount of anonymity. But like in what context and where is really going to depend reporter to reporter. Other questions? Anybody?
Hey, thanks, Dan. Divi here. I appreciate the insight. 2 quick questions. So it's very interesting you bring these 3, but usually don't they say that you want to hook attention, so you have a hook, which is often a human story, or you humanize it. Second, you've been doing this so many years, and I know maybe the audience is different, but when you speak, who do you keep in mind? Because we all connect to you. So who do you have in mind? Because we all connect to you, whether we're driving or listening.
Thanks, Stevie. I really appreciate the question. So the first about the kind of like the story. Look, it can be very powerful if through your research there is an anecdote, an example of a person, even if it's sort of a facsimile. That can be really powerful. An actual example of somebody who's got the diabetes and is a good example of like that new person who's getting diabetes who 10 years ago was not getting the diabetes. That will go a long way towards instantaneously crystallizing the problem. A lot of times researchers don't necessarily have that, but if you do have that, if you have a story to share, an anecdote that captures the essence of that first question, by all means use it. It will be a very important device for sure. Who do I have in mind? A lot of times I think about my mom, who gets confused between Medicare and Medicaid, right? And so, and it's just a version of that, like those people in the last row in the class. I want to make sure it is important to me. One of the things that I learned at Marketplace that I've tried to employ at Tradeoffs is that the point is helping more people. There are people who have smart health policy conversations in our country. It's just too few. So how can we grow that N? And that's part of why I'm on this call with you guys and why I'm so excited to be on this call with you guys. You all have the power to increase the number of people who understand your work and the work of your colleagues more, so more people can begin to understand there are not easy answers, there are not easy solutions. This is not a plug for the show, but that there are often trade-offs. And if we want to ever really improve our healthcare system, we have to have honest conversations about the trade-offs and what our priorities are, given that there is no perfect solution. I know we're at time, but is there one final question? People can drop off. I'm happy to answer one or two more questions if there are them. Okay. Well, thank you all for having me. John, I think you've got a housekeeping note.
Awesome. That's it. Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate this, folks. Great questions. Great conversation. This was super helpful. I just put a note in the chat. Be sure to check out the APPAM calendar. There's just appam.org/events. There's a whole bunch of events coming up in the next weeks and months. Several on federal actions, on data, and lots of stuff on communication, these sorts of trainings that we're going to try to develop. So Dan, thanks again. This was really great.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's a real pleasure to see everybody. Thanks so much.